The talk is, it remains unanswered as to what Einstein's relativity is. The mainstream does not agree what Einstein's relativity is. The paper I'm going to refer to is called General Covariance and the Foundations of General Relativity, 8 Decades of Dispute by John D. Norton, and it's at that site there. It's a knock-on effect. Mainstream can't agree what general relativity is, so that knocks on to special relativity. It is nonsense to have a theory, Einstein's special and general relativity, that cannot be agreed on as to what it is. Right. A challenge from us dissenters to mainstream is that they give one theory instead of that they should give one theory. Give one theory instead of a mishmash of lots of different theories, and that mishmash is what they're doing at the moment. So you talk to one person who claims to believe in Einstein's relativity, and they will tell you something different to another person who claims to believe in Einstein's relativity. And when you try to point it out to them that they are contradicting each other, the relativists will then say, I'm correct, and it's the other person that's wrong. So it's ego and arrogance and so forth from these mainstream believers in Einstein's relativity, and they like to believe that they are super clever, and if anybody says anything different to them, then those people are stupid. But really it's them being stupid, lost in their own ego. So the site I'm referring to is that one, and we go to that. It's the twin paradox, and this is the report on it so far. Einstein's changing views. Einstein's 1905 paper defined the basis of special relativity. In that paper, Einstein derived the symmetric time dilation equation, which applies equally to all inertial observers. Then he wrote from this, referring to the time dilation equation, the following peculiar consequence follows: that if a clock takes a round trip, it will lose time versus a stay-at-home clock. And it says Einstein's claims seem to be many to be unjustified, and hence not just counterintuitive but also counterlogical. And so that's what you find with reading Einstein. Not only is it counterintuitive, but eventually you find out it's nonsense. It doesn't make any logical sort of sense. Hence why we are challenging them to stop talking nonsense. So carry on. But today's talk is about reading a paper by this person, John Norton, and his CV, his bio details are at that address, which is here. It's John D. Norton. He's a Director, Centre for the Philosophy of Science, and Distinguished Professor, Department of History and Philosophy of Science at Pittsburgh University at Pittsburgh. So this is the paper we'll be looking at, and it is an admission that Einstein's relativity, well, his general relativity, is not agreed upon. This is the relevant paper, and the title, General Covariance and the Foundations of General Relativity, 8 Decades of Dispute by John D. Norton. So Einstein offered the general principle covariance as the fundamental physical principle of his general theory of relativity, and as responsible for extending the principle of relativity to accelerated motion. And all this sort of ends up in dispute. This view was disputed almost immediately. Blah blah blah. Okay. Now the paper is quite a long paper. It's all these headings. I only want to go into the introduction just to let you know the problems of it it's presenting to you, because I'm not necessarily going to believe in his conclusions. It's only his point of view upon these things. What we're talking about is these people in the mainstream, they are not agreeing on general relativity. Here we go, the introduction. And if I can point to it, in November 1915, Einstein completed his general theory of relativity. Almost 8 decades later, we universally acclaim his discovery as one of the most sublime acts of human speculative thought. So it's only speculation. However, the question of precisely what Einstein discovered remains unanswered, for we have no consensus over the exact nature of the theory's foundation, and that is the big problem. Einstein's given us what he's claiming to be a theory, which is speculation, in 1915, and nobody can really make sense of it. So when they actually teach general relativity to students, they will miss out normally that there's a problem with understanding what Einstein was talking about. Einstein gave a theory, and really they don't really understand what he's talking about. They're going to give you a false version of history of Einstein's relativity, a false version of general relativity, to try to make things simple for the students to understand, and they're not going to go into the full complications that what Einstein discovered remains unanswered, for we have no consensus over the exact nature of the theory's foundations. It's very, very stupid and nonsensical to have the foundations of modern physics as based on something that nobody can agree upon. That's the foundations of it. So they're going to gloss over that for the students. They're not going to tell the students, well, make up your own mind as to whether what we're teaching is nonsense. Because, in fact, if you study the subject long enough, you say, well, it's nonsense. It's not being offered as a conclusion for the students to suddenly have all the theory is nonsense. And it should be allowed, they should be allowed critical thinking on what they're being told. So we carry on now. Is this the theory that extends the relativity of motion from inertial motion to accelerated motion as Einstein contended? So what we've got, inertial motion, that's constant velocity motion, which is supposed to be dealt with by special relativity, and accelerated motion is supposed to be when you go on to general relativity. So if we really looked into special relativity dealing with inertial motion, that doesn't really make sense, and then suddenly you're going on to another theory and that doesn't make sense. And I have dealt with this in my other videos. We have things like cuckoo process. When you try to get to special relativity from the supposed assumptions that Einstein's talking about, then you're starting from a cuckoo process. It's just all nonsensical what you're trying to do and what Einstein tried to do from that. So that's the problem there. So is this the theory that, i.e. general relativity, that extends the relative motion from inertial motion, i.e. special relativity, to accelerated motion as Einstein contended? Question mark. Or is it just a theory that treats gravitation geometrically in the space-time setting? Question mark. And that would be the idea of space-time curvature. When Einstein completed his theory, his own account of the foundations of the theory was adopted nearly universally. Well, I dispute that. There was a strong dissident movement against him for a long time. However, among the voices welcoming the new theory were small murmurs of dissent. So even when the people who were deciding to agree with Einstein's theory of relativity, general relativity, they were still dissenting within that group. Over the brief moments of history that followed, these murmurs grew until they are now some of the loudest voices of the continuing debate. So we have this ongoing debate about Einstein's general relativity, and it's causing quite a lot of upset. Loud voices being raised, and I think this is being missed out of once again what the physics students are being taught. They're not being told that there's a lot of debate going on about general relativity. In any logical system, we have great freedom to exchange theorem and axiom without altering the system's content. Thus, we need no longer formulate Euclidean geometry with exactly the definitions and postulates of Euclid, or use precisely Newton's 3 laws of motion as the foundations of classical mechanics, i.e. of Newtonian mechanics. However, some 2 millennia after Euclid and 3 centuries after Newton, we still find their postulates and law within our systems, now possibly as theorems, and sometimes even in a wording remarkably close to the original. So we pretty much understand what Newtonian physics is, which they're calling classical mechanics. We pretty much understand what Euclidean geometry is, and that's after 2 millennia for Euclidean geometry and 3 centuries after Newton. So we pretty much understand those, but as you get on to Einstein's theories, or theory, or whatever, you find that we don't know what Einstein was talking about. The continuing disagreement over the foundations of Einstein's theory, general relativity, extends well beyond such an orderly expansion of our understanding of a theory's foundations. So it's a ongoing, long-term disagreement over Einstein. It is far more than a squabble over the most persistent way to reorganize postulate and theorem, or to clarify brief moments of vagueness. And the brief moments of vagueness are by Einstein, and actually when you look into it, he's got lots of brief moments of vagueness. So Einstein is just rubbish. The voices of dissent proclaim that Einstein was mistaken over the fundamental ideas of his own theory, and that the basic principles Einstein proposed are simply incompatible with his theory. And that is a big claim to make. People are complaining that Einstein was mistaken over the fundamental parts of his theory, and that what he's saying are incompatible with his theory. Now I'm going to pull you back to one of my talks here. Next page. Here. Einstein didn't know what he was talking about. Einstein didn't know what he was talking about. And in this talk I point out that Edward Teller, who is often known as the father of the hydrogen bomb, went to a lecture by Einstein and didn't understand the lecture from Einstein, and then he found out later that Einstein didn't know what he was talking about. And I think that's pretty much sums it up. Einstein's talking about a theory or theories, and Einstein doesn't even know what he's talking about. So this is where we're getting all this nonsense from. We're getting this bit. The voices of dissent proclaim that Einstein was mistaken over the fundamental ideas of his own theory, and that's what you get from a person talking about their theory and they don't even understand it themselves. And that the basic principles Einstein proposed are simply incompatible with his theory. You also get that from a person who didn't understand his theory. Einstein doesn't understand his theory, and he's saying things that are not compatible with his theory. So you just layer upon layer of nonsense. It's all coming from Einstein. And so how do they respond to that? We'll get into that now. Many newer texts make no mention of the principles Einstein listed as fundamental to his theory. They appear as neither axiom nor theorem. So you've got the older texts which are dealing with things the way Einstein was talking about, and they suddenly realise Einstein, what he's saying doesn't really make sense, and so the newer texts on relativity, general relativity and so forth, they're having to change things from what Einstein's been saying. So they're trying to brush it under the carpet. Many newer texts make no mention of the principles Einstein listed as fundamental to his theory. They're trying to brush it under the carpet. They're trying to cover up the mess they got themselves into. Right. At best, they are recalled as ideas of purely historical importance in the theory's formation. So they're trying to brush it underway and saying it's not necessary anymore. It's purely historical, that the theory was created from what Einstein was talking about, and we're trying to sweep under the carpet that we're not going by what Einstein is saying anymore. The very name, general relativity, is now routinely condemned as a misnomer, and its use often zealously avoided in favour of, say, Einstein's theory of gravitation. So you've got the mess of general relativity. The name general relativity is really a bad name to call the theory. It's really a mess to call it general relativity. It doesn't really give a proper indication of what the theory is about, and so they want to try to change the name of it. They want to say it's Einstein's theory of gravitation. Calling it general relativity, that just is a mess. It's condemned as a misnomer. Right. What has complicated an easy resolution of the debate are the alterations of Einstein's own position of the foundations of his theory. And this is one of the problems with Einstein. He keeps changing his mind. You read his papers and you find he keeps changing his mind. So that's the problem for that. The alterations of Einstein's own position on the foundations of his theory. So he keeps changing his mind about the foundations of his theory. This is why it's all just nonsense. He's just changing his mind. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He's changing his mind. At different times of his life, he sought these foundations and three principles, and with varying emphasis. They were the principle of equivalence, Machs' principle, and the principle of relativity. By his own ambition, that's Einstein 1918, he did not always distinguish clearly between the last two, so he's getting a mess up here. Machs' principle and the principle of relativity, he's just going to mess them up. So this is typical, a person who doesn't know what he's talking about. Einstein doesn't know what he's talking about, and he's going to mess things up. Again, he lost completely his enthusiasm for Machs' principle, abandoned it unequivocally in his later life. So you've got it now. This is Einstein. He's changed his mind. 1 minute his theory is going to have Machs' principle in it, next minute he abandons it in his later life. So with a person like that, what are you supposed to do? Does his general relativity, or do you want to call it now Einstein's theory of gravitation, does it contain Machs' principle or doesn't it? Which version of Einstein are you going to? Are you going by presumably what he was talking about in 1918, where he had Machs' principle, or are you going by the older Einstein and when he suddenly abandoned it? It's just nonsense. It's just nonsense. You haven't got anything here from Einstein as making any coherent sense. All you've got is him changing his mind all the time. The reception and development of Einstein's account in the literature has been anything but a graceful evolution. And it's not a graceful evolution because it's Einstein keeps changing his mind. It has been more a process of uncontrolled mutation, fragmentation, and even disintegration. That shows you how bad it is the theories coming from him. It's a complete mess, nightmare. The principle of equivalence took root in so many variant forms that Anderson and Gauthier, 1969, eventually lamented that there are almost as many formulations of the principle as there are authors writing about it. So they're lamenting that there's many different versions of the principle of equivalence. And that's supposed to be one of the ideas that Einstein's building upon. And he's left it in a mess people are trying to sort out some sense to it, and they're coming up with lots of different things to say about it. They're not all agreeing what all that means. What does it mean, the principle of equivalence? And there's sort of like almost as many formulations of the principle as there are authors writing about it. This dissertation is at least partially fueled by sceptical attacks on the principle, such as Singh's 1960 famous complaint that he has never been able to find a version of the principle that is not false or trivial. So Singh's criticism is saying whatever version they got of the principle of equivalence it's either going to be false or it's going to be trivial. So all the different versions of that are basically nonsense, or seem to be basically nonsense. The lotus of greatest controversy has been at the core of Einstein's interpretation, the principle of relativity. So Einstein has put his interpretation on the principle of relativity, and there's still controversy over what does that mean. Does the general theory extend the principle of relativity to accelerated motion, and is this extension captured by the general covariance of its law? And it's asking these questions, and really it's just ongoing arguments. It is routinely allowed that the special theory of relativity satisfies the principle of relativity of inertial motion simply because it is Lorentz covariant. And like the sort of things I wouldn't agree with that. There's extra bits. It's more on Einstein when he's talking about this special relativity theory. He's saying stuff which is not in agreement with what Lorentz was talking about when Lorentz was talking about Lorentz transformations. So we carry on. Its law remains unchanged in the form under a Lorentz transformation of the space and time coordinates. Now Einstein's general theory is generally covariant. Its laws remain unchanged under an arbitrary transformation of the space-time coordinates. Does this formal property allow the theory to extend to the principle, extend the relativity of motion to accelerated motion? Question mark. Until recent decades, the majority of expositions of general relativity answer yes, and some still do. So, as early as 1917, Kretschmann argued that the general covariance has no real physical content and no connection to an extension of the principle of relativity. So he's arguing there isn't. There's no relativity going on when you go on to general covariance. Rather, the finding a generally covariant formulation of a theory amounts essentially to a challenge to the mathematical ingenuity of the theorist. Sceptical sentiments such as those drove a dissent tradition that has grown from a minority in Kretschmann's time to one of the dominant traditions at present. So there's a big dissent movement on this issue. It has derived further support from the development of more sophisticated mathematical techniques that are now routinely used to give generally covariant formulations of essentially all commonly discussed space-time theories, including special relativity and Newtonian space-time theory. So what they've done, one of the things they've done is they've made Newtonian theory into a space-time theory, and they've got lots of these different space-time theories. Einstein's special and general relativity is now just part of these various different space-time theories. That's how much of a confusion he's created for us, because it's not really clear what his theory is supposed to be. Finally, to many, Einstein's statements of his views seem too simple or abbreviated to stand without further elaboration or repair, whereas their flat rejection by the skeptics seemed too easy. So Einstein's making a lot of these statements of what he's thinking, and as I pointed out, he's changing his mind a lot, and they don't really make sense. They're too simple, abbreviated, and they need further clarification, and he hasn't given those. Thus much energy has been devoted to finding ways in which the general covariance of Einstein's theory can be seen to be distinctive even in comparison with the generally covariant formulations of special relativity and Newtonian spacetime theory. The best developed of these attempts is due to Anderson, 1967, and is based on the distinction of absolute from dynamical objects. General relativity satisfies Anderson's principle of general invariance, which entails that the theory can employ no non-trivial absolute objects. This principle was offered as a clearer statement of Einstein's real intention and as giving a precise interpretations of Einstein's repeated disavowal of the absolute of Newton's space and time. So what they've got here is they're trying to make sense of what Einstein's talking about, and they've got this person, Anderson 1967, who's trying to give a different version of it. He's trying to say this is what Einstein really meant. The purpose of this article is to review the development of Einstein's views on general covariance, their relation to the foundations of general relativity, and we still call it general relativity, even though it should probably, that's a misnomer, and it should be called something else. Relation to the foundations of general relativity and the evolution of the continuing debate that sprang up around these views. And section 2 and 3 below, which when we get into, we'll review the development of Einstein's views. Section 4 will outline the way in which attempts were made to receive and assimilate Einstein's views in a favourable manner. Section 5 will review Kretschmann's famous objection, Einstein's response, and the diverse ways in which both were received in the literature. It includes discussion of modern geometrical methods that ensure automatic general covariance. Section 6 reviews the development of the characterization of a relativity principle as a symmetry principle rather than a covariance principle. Section 7 explores the tradition of exposition of general relativity that simply ignores the entire debate and makes no mentions of principles of general relativity or of general covariance. So there's a tradition, and I presume that's probably the teaching of it, of just ignoring all the problems in general relativity when teaching it to students. They're just going to ignore all the problems, going to give the students a false idea of what's going on. Section 8 develops Anderson's theory of absolute and dynamical objects as it relates to Einstein's view. Section 9 examines Folk's and Azriel's proposals for alterations to the covariance of general relativity and gives an historical explanation of why so many of Einstein's pronouncements on coordinates and covariance are puzzling to modern readers. So they're trying to come up with ways to change what Einstein's saying and give a different theory. And they're saying, well, they're admitting to things like things that Einstein is saying are puzzling to modern readers. So it's puzzling. What is he supposed to be talking about? In the time period covered in this review article, the mathematical methods used in relativity theory evolved from a coordinate-based calculus of tensors to a coordinate-free geometrical approach. The mathematical language and sensibilities used in various stages of the article will match those of the particular subject under review. The alternative of translating everything to a single language would harmfully distort the subject. So I don't say it's already harmfully distorted. So we're going back. So basic summary of the issues he's going to go into. He's going to try to sort out the mess which Einstein's left on all these issues. And I'll recap what's being said here. Almost 8 decades. And the article is written here in 1993. He's saying after eight decades, this is when Einstein wrote it, 1915, almost 8 decades later, we universally acclaimed his discovery as one of the most sublime acts of human speculative thought. It's just speculation. It's not really a proper theory, it's just speculation. However, the question of precisely what Einstein discovered remains unanswered, for we have no consensus over the exact nature of the theory's foundations, and Einstein is the one who's left it all confused. He's changed his mind a lot, and he's just left it all confused. When he should have clarified things more, he didn't. It's all just a mess from Einstein. A theory which is Einstein's special and general relativity, it's such a mess it should not really be laid as a foundation for what sciences should be built using. It just should be thrown away. It's nonsense. It's just nonsense to go from a theory where you're trying to work out what's really talking about. And as pointed out, Newton's theory makes sense. Some 2 millennia after Euclid's geometry still makes sense. 3 centuries after Newton's theory makes sense. But we still, after 8 decades from 1919, Einstein's theories don't make sense. Doesn't make sense. Einstein just does not make sense. So I go to my videos. So this is, I'll go to my videos first. Lost them. I lost the videos, but I go back to the. Go back to this then. This is our challenge from the dissent movement. They should sort out what they're talking about. Open letter on special relativity. Open letter on special relativity towards an authoritative standard interpretation of special relativity. The need. Students, you need to be sure you understand every nuance regarding the questions below. The fact that special relativity has meant different things to different people, and that even most relatives professors have made statements that imply contradictory interpretations, is well known and well documented, but sometimes they dispute that. See the open letter on the twin paradox, section 1, so forth. So you've got your professors at university and they're just going to contradict themselves. And who do we blame? Well, of course we blame Einstein, because he left it in a mess. He didn't explain what he was talking about. Almost 8 decades after 1915, we still don't understand what he was talking about. The question of precisely what Einstein discovered remains unanswered. He just changed his mind. He never left us a proper theory or theories. He just left us a big mess. And what do? They're trying to still sort out something from that mess, and they just don't agree about it. It's just nonsense. Thank you.